Yo, stop what you're doing right now, because what went down on NBA Today regarding the Knicks' injury situation is going to give you serious anxiety about whether this championship roster can actually stay healthy long enough to fulfill their potential. And I'm not talking about minor bumps and bruises that disappear after a day or two. We're talking about OG Anunoby, missing the preseason opener with a sprained hand that forced him to sit out, despite the injury not being considered significant. And we're talking about Josh Hart, suffering what appeared to be a catastrophic non-contact lower back injury that had him writhing in pain on the court, unable to get up on his own, grimacing as training staff helped him to the locker room before he threw the ball into the stands in frustration and got himself ejected. When Malika Andrews brought in the injury updates from Abu Dhabi, and the panel started parsing through Bill Peto's reporting and Brian Windhorst's follow-up about Hart's actual status, I literally had to pause, because this is the nightmare scenario that every Knicks fan has been dreading since the moment this roster got assembled. The injury bug that destroyed last season's playoff run potentially striking again before real basketball even starts. So I'm watching NBA Today as they're setting up their Knicks preseason coverage, and suddenly the entire show pivots into injury analysis mode because before the game against Philadelphia even tipped off, reports started filtering in that OG Anunoby wouldn't be available due to a hand injury sustained during practice. You could feel the collective anxiety from the panel, because this is a team that's already dealing with Josh Hart's finger injury that's going to require him to wear a splint for the entire season, and now you're adding another starter to the injury report before preseason Game 1. The psychological toll of constantly monitoring injury reports, adjusting rotations, managing workload, this is what killed the Knicks' championship dreams last year, when they were running guys into the ground with no depth behind them, and everyone's terrified it's happening again. Let me paint you the complete picture of what really transpired during this segment. Because the surface level Knicks have some injury concerns headline completely misses the organizational PTSD from last season's playoff disaster, the specific nature of these injuries, and why non-contact issues are uniquely terrifying. The cautious optimism from the medical updates, suggesting these aren't long-term problem, and the harsh reality that depth and injury management will determine whether this talented roster can actually accomplish anything meaningful, or whether there'll be another what-if story of a team that looked great on paper but couldn't stay healthy when it mattered. Here's the OG Anunoby situation that got addressed first, and Kendrick Perkins was making this point about how the Knicks are clearly being overly cautious with their star players during preseason rather than risking aggravating anything that could linger into the regular season. Bill Pito reported live from Abu Dhabi that Anunoby sprained his left hand during practice, but the injury is not seen as significant, and the team is likely just being extra careful given his injury history and how crucial he is to their defensive identity. He's listed as day-to-day, which in preseason typically means you sit out a game or two just to be safe, rather than pushing through discomfort that could potentially turn into something worse. Stephen A. Smith was expressing his frustration about being robbed of seeing what he wanted to see in this preseason opener. A starting lineup featuring OG Anunoby and Mitchell Robinson together, playing at Mike Brown's faster pace, with Anunoby gravitating to the corners where he belongs and knocking down threes when defenders help off him. That's the championship blueprint everyone's been imagining all summer, and now we have to wait longer to actually see it in action because of a hand sprain that probably isn't serious, but is significant enough that the medical staff doesn't want to risk it. But here's where Stephen A.'s analysis got really interesting, and this is something I think Knicks fans need to hear. He has a feeling that OG Anunoby is going to be one of the absolute best players on this team all season long. Not just a solid two-way contributor, but a genuine difference-maker who elevates his game to another level. Anunoby has publicly stated that his goal is to make NBA first-team All-Defend, and to reach that level requires a commitment and intensity that goes beyond what he showed last season. If he's healthy and locked in, If he's providing elite perimeter defense while knocking down threes at a 38-40% clip, the Knicks become exponentially harder to beat, because suddenly you've got 4 legitimate two-way starters who can guard multiple positions and space the floor offensively. The expectation from the panel was that Anunoby probably won't play in the second preseason game against Philly tomorrow morning, but once the team gets back to the States, he should be available and fully integrated into the rotation. That's the best-case scenario, a precautionary absence that prevents anything from becoming a lingering problem, rather than a legitimate injury that costs him weeks. But then, the Josh Hart situation unfolded during the game, and this is where the segment shifted from mild concern to genuine alarm, because non-contact injuries are uniquely terrifying in ways that collisions or awkward landings aren't. The film they showed was absolutely gut-wrenching. Hart grabs a rebound, takes one dribble, and just collapses to the ground with nobody touching him. He's immediately holding his lower back, grimacing in obvious pain, unable to get up on his own. Training staff rushed over. Nick Nurse is checking on him from the Sixers bench, looking genuinely worried, and Hart is writhing around trying to get comfortable, but clearly in agony. Then, and this is where the absurdity of NBA rules creates this bizarre situation, Hart throws the ball away because a Sixers player is trying to take it from him while he's injured on the ground. And because the ball goes into the stands, he gets automatically ejected from the game, even though he was never coming back anyway, because he could barely walk. The optics were terrible. A player clearly hurt, getting helped to the locker room, and simultaneously being ejected for throwing the ball out of frustration and pain. Richard Jefferson was making this critical point during the breakdown about why non-contact injuries are so concerning compared to contact injuries. When someone lands on your ankle or you collide with another player, at least there's an obvious external cause that explains what happened. But when your body just gives out on its own with no contact, that suggests either a pre-existing weakness, a compensation injury from playing through something else, or muscular structural failure that could indicate more serious underlying problems. Those are the injuries that tend to linger, that come back repeatedly, that turn into chronic issues rather than acute one-time events. But here's where the good news started filtering in, and Brian Windhorst's reporting completely changed the tone of the conversation. According to Windhorst's sources, Hart likely could have returned to the game if he hadn't been ejected, meaning the injury looked way worse than it actually was. And the fact that he physically couldn't come back had more to do with the automatic ejection rule than the severity of what happened to his back. The Knicks themselves confirmed this, stating that Hart didn't return because he was ejected, not because the injury prevented him from playing. Hart himself made light of the situation on social media afterward, posting a clip from the movie Friday, showing a character on the ground with back pain yelling, "Don't nobody touch me," which is exactly how Hart looked during the game. The fact that he's joking about it hours later is a legitimately good sign that suggests this isn't a serious long-term issue, because if he was genuinely worried about his back, he wouldn't be making jokes on social media. The official medical update that Mike Brown provided was about as good as could be expected. Lower back soreness, day-to-day status, we'll see how he feels tomorrow. That's preseason speak for he tweaked something, it hurts, but it's not structural damage that requires extended recovery time. Nick Nurse, who had the best view of the injury from just feet away, said he thought something really bad happened when he initially saw it because Hart went down on his own without any collision, and those are always scary. But the subsequent evaluation suggests it's muscle soreness rather than anything that requires imaging or extended treatment. Here's what really emerged from the entire NBA Today coverage that I think Knicks fans need to internalize. Injuries are going to happen throughout an 82 base, and the difference between championship teams and disappointing ones is how well you manage those injuries, how cautious you are during the preseason and regular season to prevent minor issues from becoming major problems, and whether you have enough depth to absorb temporary absences without completely falling apart. OG's hand sprain isn't serious. Hart's back soreness appears to be exactly that. Soreness, not structural damage. Both guys should be fine for opening night. But this is a reminder that health is the most important factor for any championship contender. And the Knicks need to be smart about managing workloads and not pushing through injuries just to win preseason games or regular season contests in November that don't ultimately matter.